You're listening to the Ontos Podcast, where we explore the nature of stories and the pursuit of being in truth. I'm Maq.
And I'm Vaud.
And our sentience depends on you. Now cue the intro music. Alright, so chapter 4. So the motley crew comes in.
Yeah, so we open up again on Vin as our point of view character, and she's now with Cayman's old crew, now run by one of his former crew members. The name escapes me. And they're kind of discussing what Kelsier could be planning. And the big thing to take away here is no one's even mentioning or caring about what happened to Vin. Even Eulith, the guy who betrayed her, is like, kind of giving off the air of like, yeah, and like, I'll do it again. That's just life. That's what's going to happen. But they're kind of trying to figure out, what's the connection. And they refer to Vin as a twixt, which is kind of described as a person who's an in-between, So like, she's a part of Cayman's old crew. And so she's going to be the one crew member that Kelsey's crew talks to kind of get like some ideas flowing between the two, or to basically give them the errands that they're going to run working with this other crew. And, they're kind of surprised that they chose Vin for that. Little do they know, they don't have no idea what we found out last chapter, but the crew really kind of lays down and focuses on Kelsier here. And they try to figure out, like, what the heck happened, because apparently before the Piths of Halfsin, Kelsier was still incredibly well known. And we kind of get a glimpse into that history of his. He was considered one of, if not the best crew leader in Luthadel. I think they mentioned he would rob noblemen, the ministry. It didn't matter. He went after everybody, and he always won, no matter what happened.
And the only way they even caught him was because the Lord Ruler himself put a trap for him.
Yeah, so they talk about how, the Lord Ruler put a trap down for him. Like, ultimately, Kelsier took a job, or then put up a job where the Lord Ruler himself got involved. They caught him, and they sent him and his wife Mare to the Piths of Halfsin. And they sent him there to die. We still do not really learn what's at the pits. No one seems to know what the heck is actually at the pits. They just know that when you go there, you don't come back. And Kelsier became the survivor of Halfsin. He became the one and only person to ever be known to have survived and escaped the pits. But his wife died there. And we kind of get this little moment with Vin going, well, he's lost someone too. And that connection kind of begins to form again, where she sees herself, or she sees him and, herself, and kind of that glimpse of like, this person went through a lot of crap, the same as I did. And, from here, people believe that his scars, like Kelsier's scars, the scars that we've been referring to this entire time, that the book's been referring to this entire time, they believe that they came from like 3 different things. One of them mentions that these scars maybe came about because they were scaling a wall in which he had to escape, and he cut himself up doing it. Another one says that he killed a monster in the pits, one of the monsters that defends the pits of the Halfsin, and he killed it by stuffing his arm down its throat and strangling it from the inside. And then another one mentions that, hey, he arrived here claiming he killed one already. Maybe he killed a Steel Inquisitor on his way out, and that's where he got those scars. And they can all agree, though, that the Kelsier that went in is not the same. The Kelsier that went in was not a Misting, which they kind of all believe him to be. And a lot of them think that's not even Kelsier anymore. Sort of like kind of a flashback to the prologue here with the plantation ska. They believe Kelsier's not alive anymore. Something's probably wearing his face, and they mention that possible thing is a mist wraith. It kind of shows here because in the city, it kind of seemed like the Skaal were almost used to the mist. It almost seemed like being in the city, people really didn't fear it anymore. It still made them uneasy, but we never got the sense that the people in the city feared the mist. And it's kind of funny because one of the guys argues that and says, like, we go out in the mist all the time in the city. And one person goes, yeah, but have you gone out into the mist outside of the city? That's where the mist wraiths are. Mm-hmm. And that's where they'll get you, and that's probably what happened to Kelsier. And so yeah, ultimately they believe that he's has to be something greater. At the very least, they start bringing up the rumors again of Mistborn. They say he's probably a Mistborn. If he's not a Mistwraith, he's a Mistborn, or maybe he's a Mistborn Mistwraith. They don't know. He's not human anymore, is what they seem to claim. And man, so they consider Mistborn like the heralds of the mist themselves. I think that was a statement, almost like word for word, where they believe like they own it. They own the mist. They live in the mist. The mist grants them power. All of these things, and Vin kind of like confirms that in the sense that like everyone's heard these rumors. Another rumor for the Mistborn, where they were a secret like sect of assassins that all worked for the Lord Ruler, and that they would kill on a whim whatever he needed. But funny enough, with her being kind of given the idea of her like she's a Mistborn and Kelsier's a Mistborn based on what he told her, her brother Reen said that they were a hoax, that Mistborn don't exist. And so there is this kind of like wide spectrum of like what the common people believe when it comes to the allomantic powers. We're kind of starting to see in this case that allomancy might not be well taught to people outside of the nobles, because people seem to be they all believe several different things on what it actually is. Well, it's kind of in this moment that Vin makes the decision. Up to this point, she's seen herself and her life as being uninspired. I think that's the word she used. And if she's really a Mistborn, she will bow down and be Kelsier's slave as long as it takes to learn how to use this power, so that one day she will be a slave to no one ever again. And she kind of like makes the promise to herself that this is what she's going to do. And with that, everyone kind of starts to leave except for Vin, because they know the meeting's about to start and they're not welcome. And so the new crew leader rounds up the whole squad and they leave. And Vin's left alone until the first of the potential crew members arrive. And that is, well, I guess the first two. The first one to walk down is this kind of like soldier looking dude. He's pretty buff, pretty strong, fair cut. Vin specifically describes him as having the soldier look to him. And he's followed by a very sharply dressed middle-aged man that is in a nobleman's suit. And the two individuals come down the stairs, and Vin's instantly likes the man in the nobleman's suit. Like, there's just something about him. Quite a charming gentleman. And the man, just comes down and, says, oh, what's your name? And they kind of introduce each other, and they figure out, oh, she must be the Twix, and ask for a cup of wine. And Vin just jumps off her seat and says she'll do it. She'll get him what he needs. And it's kind of at this point that Ham, the soldier, tells Breeze, the sharply dressed gentleman, to knock it off and stop manipulating her. And the feeling just drops, and Vin goes, this guy was using luck, and he was so good at it that I could not even tell that something had happened. I think she even mentions that, man, when Kelsier did it, it was so blunt and obvious.
It's so obvious, right? Yeah.
My mind fought it. You should be scared, even though you weren't. You could tell. But this guy, he's good. He's that good that she couldn't tell what the heck was going on. And, we get a little bit of glimpse of Ham in this case, where Ham, upon having this kind of discussion and Vin deciding, she's not going to help this guy out, and him, one big thing that kind of stood out to me in this case was Breeze asked for the drink. He used luck to try to make her do it. He called it, he said he soothed her. And, but he kind of, he refused to get it himself. When she kind of turned it down, he almost in a way just said, oh, I'd rather not have it if no one's going to bring it to me. And that's kind of stood out to me kind of as weird, right? Is he lazy? Does he think like so many people are below him. It's so weird. Why like if he wanted it, why didn't he just grab it afterwards, But we get this little glimpse at Ham, because Ham poses this philosophical question to everybody, like, if Vin were to commit a crime while under the influence of this luck, is that your crime or is that her crime? And Breeze just basically tells him to shut up, like, get out of here.
Yeah, he entertains it for a while, but he's just like, I'm over this.
Yeah. Well, they kind of are having this chat when Ham suddenly drops that he's a misting too. Breeze says, hey, I'm a misting. I soothe people's emotions. That's what I do. And Ham goes, yep, I'm a misting as well. I'm, what they referred to as a thug. And I burn pewter to become incredibly strong. And this is kind of when Vin realizes, wait, I've heard these stories a little bit. Mistings are said to be so dangerous that a single misting can devastate or kill an entire crew of thieves. And, when we definitely, saw that with Kelsier being Mistborn. And so we can imagine that just a couple of these abilities still could be devastating in a fight. Well, while they're having this discussion, another, like, older gentleman that kind of comes in with a limp, he's, like, described as being, like, knotted up and just, like, gnarly. He comes limping in, and they refer to him as Clubs, and they say that he is a smoker. And we finally get told what a smoker is after having sat on it a couple of chapters. And it's his job to make sure that the Steel Inquisitors don't find you. Kind of how we mentioned in the past chapter, where the Steel Inquisitor's job is to look for mistings. Well, it's his job to prevent that. Kind of makes sense for the name. We finally get the last man after that to kind of show up for the crew, I guess, in this case, and by the name of Eden. And Eden is the leader of the Ska Rebellion, which we will learn a little bit later in this chapter isn't doing that great.
Indeed.
I don't even know if you could really call it a rebellion at the point it is now, but yeah, and after that, Kelsier and Doxson arrive, and we realize Vin notices something, like, really quickly, and that's that Kelsier and Doxson are greeted with happiness. I think she says, I've never seen a crew leader greeted with happiness from the crew before. But these people are really happy to see Kelsier. They immediately go into sort of that kind of like best friend who you haven't seen, since high school, that mode where you just try to, hey, what's been going on? What's this job? What are we going to do? And Kelsier very quickly burst everyone's bubble by pointing to Eden and going, hey, he's your employer. And everyone was just like, oh, great. What could this be? Eden already doesn't like us. Eden voices that he hates that the thieves lack morals and things like that. But he needs them. And he needs them because Kelsier points out that their job is, they're gonna rob somebody, but the main purpose of their job is they're gonna overthrow the Final Empire.
The destruction of the Final Empire.
Which is, it's kind of funny, right? Like, you go for the typical heist movie where they're just like, you got to do the impossible. It's impossible to get into the bank vault, but we're going to do this. This guy was literally like, we're going to end the Final Empire. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure final's in the name. Yeah. But yeah, their goal is they're going to overthrow the Final Empire, and they're going to do it by helping Eden. Well, the two specifics of the job is they're going to give Eden an army. They're going to raise him an army, help him train that army, and then they're going to give him an opportunity to attack Luthadel. That is what's in their contract. That's what they have to do. They kind of ask what the payment's going to be. Breeze and Ham are both like, hey, I'm as ska as the next guy, but what's that payment going to be? And it was announced at 30,000 boxings, which compared to the 3,000 we just heard of seems ludicrous.
I mean, it's 10 years of a cruise together, and he said it's basically everything that we could get together over decades of time.
Yeah,
and Clubs or Ham, I think, was that's not even gonna cover expenses.
Yeah, that's literally not gonna cover the cost of what we're gonna need to do this. And Kelsier to the rescue once again. He goes, well, we have a deal with Eden though. Once he attacks the Luthadel and he takes the palace, we are entitled to half of the Lord Ruler's treasury. no matter how big or small that is. And they all kind of smile simultaneously, and you get that. And that means we're entitled to half of the atium. And we get this mention of atium. No idea what it is, but it suddenly gets everyone's attention. The what you can consider the top performers in their profession at this point, at least if they're working with Kelsier, right? Some of the best mistings out there, if that's the case. If you're catching their attention with the payment, you know it's good. So we're mentioning that ATM's on the table now, whatever that is, and suddenly people are feeling more relaxed, and they're kind of like you can tell they're kind of getting in on the idea, but they ask, how are we going to do this? And Kelsier basically lays it down in 4 simple steps. Well, we need to neutralize the Luthadel garrison. We got to get the policing force out of the city. Step 2, well, after that, we just need to throw the city into chaos. Pretty simple, right? Step 3, Ydin's army is going to be raised and attack Luthadel. And step 4, we're going to rob the Lord Ruler blind and take all of his atium. Easier said than done. Definitely. And
if that wasn't big enough, he had to drop one more thing.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Because there's a little bit that happens before that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Kelsier just tries to explain that, it all works together. Them stealing the ATM is still a very important part of this job, because he believes that it will leave the Lord Ruler in financial ruin, which means that if the Lord Ruler doesn't have money, despite him being the Lord Ruler, being this incredibly powerful ruler who's supposedly been around for thousands of years, or at least 1,000 years.
You can't pay your men.
Yeah,
you don't have much going on.
You can't pay your armies. You don't have armies.
Lannisters taught us that.
You can't have your armies. We get another drop of the Koloss here, and I think this is when we actually get a description of what they could possibly be, because I want to say Hammond even says, what if he just marches his Koloss to Luthadel? And Kelsier says, well, if he does that, these are creatures that would cause more destruction than anyone could ever dream. And so we would basically be doing the same thing. He would ruin his own city.
He'd destroy his own city, yeah.
And so he most likely wouldn't do that. Well, the goal at that point would be to cause the noblemen to fight amongst each other. He's like, hey, the noblemen are going to fight amongst each other, and we have chaos. We can do this, guys. He's just basically he's throwing some half-baked ideas out there just to kind of try to bait them in and say, these ideas suck. But they suck because it's only me. With all of us, we got this. Well, this is enough for Clubs. Clubs is like, you're a bunch of idiots. I'm out of here. And he leaves.
There's always one.
Yeah, there's always one. And, if you know heist movies, spoiler, but there is always one. Well, what is it? Ham kind of says, this is still good and dandy, but won't the Lord Ruler just get more ATM? And that's when Kelsier lets the biggest smile, and he goes, well, I know where it is. I spent a year of my life there, and I'm now the survivor of said place. So I know exactly where the ATM is. If we, so we could, there's a good chance here that we have this in the bag. We know where he could possibly get more. We could even mess with that if we wanted to. Well, with that, Ham and Breeze, they're in. Ham is in because he just likes Kelsier. He even admits that. He goes, I don't care how crazy this was. I was always going to be in. I was just asking the questions. And Breeze can't let a challenge go. But yeah, Clubs decides to leave, and I think Ydin even mentions it, but Vin goes, why are you letting him go? He's just going to betray us. He's going to, he's probably going to betray us. And she gets surprised again by Kelsier and Doxson saying it. But Kelsier basically saying, I don't work that way. I'm not going to kill anybody just because they disagree. And Doxson says, yeah, we wouldn't have invited him if we knew, we couldn't trust him, that he wasn't going to betray us. And so Clubs leaves. The crew's like, we're in, how are we going to do this? And Kelsier basically goes, oh yeah, by the way, go ahead. What does he say, Maq?
I'm going to kill him too.
Yep. He's going to kill the Lord Ruler. And at this point, I think I want to say that like Hammond refers to the Lord Ruler as like a slither of infinity,
A
like
piece of God
a
himself.
piece of God himself. How are you going to do that? And Kelsier's like, well, he killed Mare. Not directly, but he sent us to the pits, and Mare's dead now. And so because he killed Mare, I'm going to end his life. And the way I'm going to do it is through this medal here. He calls it the 11th medal, and he basically mentions how, in far, far away places, there's a legend that if a Mistborn is burning and using this medal, he can kill the Lord Ruler. And that's basically where we're left with this episode, is that proclamation of that he's going to end the Lord Ruler's life.
So I mean, this is basically where we get the stakes. We want to do this job. We have this group of people who would like, they're not going to be bleeding hearts. They're not just going to sacrifice themselves for anything. But this is probably the biggest job that they can imagine, which is getting a hold of the most powerful person's, collection of everything that they have, and particularly this stuff we called ATM, which is at least we know very, very valuable. We find out, where it comes from, that the pits of Hassan are basically where he ends up getting his ATM, and it's probably the only place, as far as we know. We get the setup that we have the rebellion leader, or this guy who's got the background of a rebellion set up, and that he's going to be the one that kind of helps out orchestrate everything. And we get a little bit of idea of how they kind of plan on getting all this stuff done. We got introduced to these guys who know Kelsier well, and are well known by Kelsier, who he respects, which we're starting to see. Like, if you're respected by Kelsier, that's probably a big deal. And we find out that these powers are not just they're not just flat and blank, which is to say, like, Vin used her luck a certain way, she got luck used on her a certain way, and then when Breeze used it, it was like an expert touch. It was completely different from what she's used to experiencing, and he did it enough to where it wasn't just, she made her feel a certain way. She made her do things he wanted.
Hey, he wouldn't claim that. In fact, he would claim he gave her the choice. He just nudged her in the direction he
was
wanted.
Able to nudge very well. Let's say that. He's a good nudger. But he wants to be called a soother, not a nudger. I'm sure a nudger would be very interesting. And then, we get introduced to, some more members of the team, and we can assume that they're also experts in their own field. So it's, we talk about how powerful Mistborns are, but we mentioned like Misting. She says, one Misting, just one of these allomantic powers has been known to be very devastating. So there's likely some learning to be done here. This is not just, you're able to do this, now you're all powerful. There's something more to all this stuff. There's a bit of subtlety that goes along with it. We kind of find out that, there was at least one Skaal rebellion where thousands of Skaal died like 3,000 years ago.
300.
Yeah. 300, or like it's a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's at least a bit of history here.
Kelsier points out that like the history of the Skaal rebellion is not good. They have done essentially nothing, and like the argument here isn't even that he's saying like, you've done nothing meaningful in the sense that like you've changed anything. He's not even having like the bar that high. The bar is set so low that he's like, you haven't even done anything that like the Skaal would resemble as a victory, which at this point the bar would be set very low for.
Right. And so, I mean, there's this understanding of history that kind of points out like there's a reason for the Skaal to feel hopeless. Like they've been pretty unsuccessful in the past, and that's also a reason why everyone's all skeptical that something like this could be pulled off. But essentially the prize is so big, not just from a, oh, cool, we might potentially be able to free some people kind of standpoint, but also from the standpoint of we might actually be able to get like the greatest riches that anyone's ever seen. So, I mean, this really kind of puts into the idea of like what the stakes of this whole thing is. It's going to be essentially victory or death, because that's what they're staring down. They're going to go after the most powerful people in the most powerful city, in the most powerful empire that their history has ever known, who has very successfully, squelched things in the past. And the victory will be the largest treasury or the most riches that anyone has ever had outside of being the actual Lord Ruler himself, or death.
Yeah, I think it even points that out, or Eden even says at one point, they ask him how many men he has, and he says he has like 300 active rebellion, including women and children. And I was like, oof. Yeah, you really aren't giving them anything to work with here.
Which is why he gave them 30,000 boxings to make an army, and they were like, man, even with that. But Kelsier's like, oh, we're not just going to get the army. We're going to actually overthrow the empire. And not only are we going to overthrow the empire, we're going to take everything that he has.
Yeah. Man, it is, kind of with it all being set out. I think it was hilarious. I think Eden points that out perfectly. There's at one point in this chapter where Eden goes, man, I shouldn't have come here. You saying this out loud, I'm realizing how crazy this actually is.
Well, it was also funny. There was a hilarious joke. I forgot exactly what the context was, but Eden actually says something to the effect of, I've never met a Mistborn before. And it's kind of a double joke because, one, Breeze, I think, laughs. He laughs and he says, listen, you got to learn, like, if you don't talk, people won't realize how dumb you are. But what's funny is Breeze saying that, not realizing who's sitting across from him in Vin.
Yeah. Kind of asking everyone to join and everything. It is quite interesting. This just seems impossible from this thought process. Like, just actually kind of looking at what they need to do. And I know that's kind of the genre, the heist genre itself, is let's take something impossible and make it possible. And I want to say, like, Kelsey even kind of points it out, that, like, hey, that's what we're designed for. Like, us as a thieving crew, the Skull Rebellion itself lacks vision, and we do not. That's the only reason the Skull Rebellion hasn't been successful before, is they lack vision. And through our vision, we're going to give them a shot. And like you mentioned, Eden kind of, like you mentioned, Eden is definitely the everyday man here. He's kind of like our insert in this case. And it's like, yeah, this seems pretty dang impossible. But like you said with Breeze, I've never met a Mistborn before. Well, now you have two in front of you, and Breeze finds that out a little bit later. And hey, the impossible can happen.
And the other thing is, like, this is the point when I was first reading that everything got really exciting, because the exciting part of a heist for me, or when things get really, really interesting, is when they start saying how impossible everything is, because or you feel like they're gonna get around it somehow.
Yeah, that's what you're being promised.
The promise is that this is impossible, but it's still gonna happen, and you're just racking your brain to think of how is that even possible. And there are only two ways I can go about. It's either gonna happen in like a really unsatisfying way that like doesn't make any sense, or it's gonna be something that's like mind blowing. And this is setting up to be mind-blowing.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's one point when Breeze and Ham finally realize that Vin is a Mistborn, because that's what Kelsier tells them that. And Hammond goes, 2 Mistborn, this is seeming a lot more possible now. Kind of hinting at like how like important and how strong a Mistborn can be. And you know what? In chapter 5, we're going to see how devastating they can actually be.
Hey guys, it's Matt. Thanks for listening to the Altos Podcast. You'll start seeing regularly scheduled episodes starting November 14, 2022. If you'd like to follow us, please consider subscribing. We're a small project, so please support us with likes and comments because that's what the algorithms crave. If you're listening to the YouTube channel, please hit the notification bell. And if you really want to give us a boost, consider supporting us on Patreon so we can give Vaud a better mic.